Hello, everyone, and welcome to day two of the Boys Town Pediatrics Virtual Newborn Expo. My name is Gabby, and I am here live with Dr. Sarah Orr, who is a pediatrician at our East Clinic at Boys Town Pediatrics. Dr. Orr, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. It's so great to have you, especially for our Newborn Expo. Super exciting. We, like I mentioned yesterday, are going live every day this week through Sunday, January 30th at 3 o'clock p.m. And then we also have additional bonus content posting every night at 6 o'clock. So make sure to catch that tonight. We have Dr. Orr again, and she'll be talking about how to get through the first few sleepless months with a newborn. Just as I said yesterday, too, we are doing a giveaway during this live presentation. So make sure you leave a comment below. And you can comment anything. You can comment a question about crying for Dr. Orr. Let us know what you're most excited for this week to be entered to win a Baby Cuddles gift basket from Carter's. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and hop into these questions for Dr. Orr, and let's get started. So Dr. Orr, our first question is pretty general, but it's important to know, why do newborns cry?
So, newborns cry for lots of reasons. The most common one that probably everybody thinks about is because they're hungry. So, keeping track of how often they're eating is a really important in those first few months. And you can start to see a pattern as to how often your baby feeds. And sometimes you can even start anticipating when that next feed should be before they start to cry. Other reasons a baby might cry is if they're too hot or too cold. A good rule of thumb is they should be wearing as many layers as you are, and maybe one more if it's really cold in the house or outside. Another is if they're wet or soiled, so check those wet diapers. A lot of the times within the first few months, they tend to pee and poop about as often as they eat, and they eat almost every 2 to 3 hours, sometimes more often. So you're really going to be changing diapers pretty often. Sometimes babies will also cry if they're sick, and obviously at that point you should be contacting your pediatrician. Sometimes they're just overstimulated and there's too much going on, so you have to kind of limit what's happening, make it quieter, darker in the room, and see if that helps. And then sometimes, honestly, they're just bored.
Yeah.
So babies want to be entertained just as much as any other child or adult. So when they're awake, be talking to them, singing songs, showing them things, stuff like that.
Yeah, perfect. So how can parents figure out the cause of their cry? For example, what cues can parents look for to find out more on if their child is hungry, tired, etc.?
Yeah. So a lot of parents will tell you that over time they start to be able to kind of differentiate between the two different cries, between being hungry, scared, tired, those types of things. But there are a lot of other cues they can look for as well. So hunger cues, crying is a hunger cue. It's actually a pretty late hunger cue though. So they should be doing a lot of other things to kind of tell you that they're hungry before they start crying. So some of the other cues are licking their lips, if they start sticking their tongue out a lot, or they kind of start moving their head around like they're looking for a bottle or a breast, something like
Mhm.
that. They may also start putting their hands in their mouths, or if you put their hand near their mouth, they may start sucking on it or open their mouth. Um, those are probably the most common hunger cues we see.
Mhm. Yeah.
If if a baby is tired, you might notice that they're yawning more. Um, Rubbing at their eyes is a more advanced skill. So your older babies may do that, but your younger ones in the first few months aren't going to have that type of coordination. But you'll notice that their eyes kind of droop. And when you're feeding, you'll definitely notice that they slow down when they start to suck and things like that. Or even if they just have a pacifier, their suck starts to slow down. And that's a good cue that they're probably just tired.
Yeah. Okay. So, how can parents soothe a crying baby?
So there's lots of ways to soothe a crying baby. Some of the most common ones are to swaddle the baby. We always recommend using a large, thin blanket. The large, fluffy blankets are really soft and very nice, but they're not super safe for swaddling. holding baby, walking with them, that motion that you do, kind of where you bounce or pat their bottom while you walk, simulates what they were feeling when they were in the womb, and so it's very soothing for them. And then calming sounds like white noise or humming is another really good way to soothe baby. There's lots of apps and things, both on phones and iPads, tablets, that you have white noise apps that you can turn on. And the pacifier is always a good option too. I know some parents, especially if they want to breastfeed, they try to avoid that pacifier for a while. And that's okay. We do want to establish a really good latch if you're trying to breastfeed. But after 3 to 4 weeks, you can really start to introduce that pacifier, and that does help as well.
Awesome. So, when should crying be of concern?
Yeah, so if you think your baby's sick and they're crying, definitely bring them into a pediatrician. Fever is a really good thing to check if you feel like your baby's just been crying a lot and you've tried all of the things, you know they're clean and they're fed and nothing's working. Go ahead and take their temperature if they feel warm or they're not acting quite right. A fever is an emergency for all babies 2 months or younger, so definitely you need to see your doctor pretty much immediately if they do have a fever. If your baby is spitting up and vomiting a lot while crying, that can be a sign of reflux, as well as some other things that your pediatrician can talk to you more about. If something changes in how they look, so if their soft spot becomes more like bulging or like a bump, if something becomes red or swollen looking on them, definitely bring them in. Or if you think there's been some type of injury. So if baby's been crying a lot and they recently rolled off the bed or the couch, or they bumped their head on something, definitely let your pediatrician know. And then if there's ever a color change, specifically like a blue, gray, purple color change and around their mouth, that's always a sign that they need to be seen by a doctor.
Okay. Yes, definitely important to remember. So, the next question is sometimes when babies cry, their face turns red, they might hold their breath and become kind of sweaty. So, when this happens, it can look kind of alarming to some parents. So, should we call our pediatrician when that happens?
Well, the first thing I say is that for any parent, especially first time parents, if you have questions or concerns, you can always call your pediatrician.
Okay.
Um, but it is common for babies when they get mad or angry to get really red. They kind of tense up. They make that face, and they'll even hold their breath for a little bit, for a few
Mhm.
seconds. Um, so it's not always a bad thing, and it should kind of resolve on its own. But if you ever feel like your baby's not breathing, or again, if they're turning other colors like blue, gray, or purple, those are all reasons you should definitely take your baby in to be seen.
Okay. So then let's talk a little bit about colic. What is it and how is it caused and how is it diagnosed?
So, colic is defined as when a baby cries for 3 or more hours a day, 3 or more days a week, for at least 3 or more weeks. So, basically, colic just means that a baby cries more often than we really expect them to. Um, so, about 1/5 of all babies develop colic, and most often it's developed. They start to have it between the second and fourth week of life. You'll notice that they're just crying more and they seem pretty inconsolable. Um, there's not really a great reason that we know of for colic. There's a lot of speculation about what causes it, but we don't have a great definitive answer to that question. So some
Mhm.
people feel like it may be a food sensitivity, and for some babies, it may be. So if you're breastfeeding, one of the things you could try is to kind of alter your diet, take out spicy foods, take out dairy, things like that, and see if it helps baby. Others believe that may just be to like gas production, and so like an upset stomach, basically. Things you can try for that are rubbing baby's belly clockwise, bicycling their legs, doing tummy time. Those can all help with gas, warm baths, things like that. But there's really no great specific answer for why colic is caused.
Mhm.
As for diagnosing colic, it's very much a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that as a pediatrician, I want to make sure that nothing else is causing your baby to cry that often, and that it really is just more of an increased sensitivity. So definitely talk to your pediatrician if you feel like your baby is crying a lot, and make sure that there's nothing else going on before we decide that it is colic.
Okay. So if our baby does get diagnosed with colic, how long does that typically last?
So it generally stops around 3 to 4 months of life. Sometimes it can last up to 6 months, but again, most often it's about 3 to 4 months.
Okay. Yeah. And we have a question here related to colic. Do you know, is it genetic? Like if mom and dad were colic as babies, is baby more likely to be colic too?
So again, because we don't know the cause, we really don't have a great answer to that question. I have had parents tell me that, oh yeah, grandma said dad was a really fussy baby.
Okay.
So we have seen those kind of correlations, but we don't know of any actual genetics between the two, just because we're not honestly sure about what's causing it.
Right. Yeah. And for everyone commenting additional questions, we're going to go ahead and answer those at the end. So keep leaving them and keep commenting to enter in today's giveaway. We'll do that at the end too. Okay. So when I put my baby down to sleep and they are crying, what should I do? Should I hold them? Should I let them cry it out? What would you recommend?
So the crying out method is probably something most of you have heard about, and somebody has probably recommended at some point. And it's not a bad method at all. We usually recommend it for our older infants, so around 6 months or older. For your newborn infants, so 1 to 2 months, crying it out is okay for a short period of time, but we don't it's not necessarily our first recommendation, just because they do have a lot of needs at that point. But there are lots of ways to help your baby learn to self-soothe that don't require crying it out necessarily. One of those is called the calm baby method. So basically, if you hear your baby crying, you slow down and you take the method one step at a time. And so first you use your voice and you slowly increase the stimulation depending on how your baby is reacting. So for example, if your baby's crying and they're in the bed, you look at baby, make sure you're making eye contact. Do that for about 5 minutes, see how baby reacts to it. If they're calming down, great, you can stop there. If they're not, then start talking to baby. Give that again about 5 minutes, because we want baby to have time to kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Again, if that's not working, then go ahead and put your hand on baby and like pat their chest or their belly, things like that. So you slowly increase the amount of contact you have with them. And at any point when they start to calm down, you can stop at that point. Again, if even putting your hand on them doesn't work, then go ahead and hold them in your arms. You can even use like a pacifier or bouncing, those types of things too. But you slowly increase the amount of interaction you have with them, so that if they really only just need to set eyes on you to know that they're safe and calm, then that's perfect. And consistency is a really big thing, especially when they are learning to sleep in a crib and things like that. So even though they're crying, that's okay. Just keep putting them down on their back in their crib or bassinet, because it is honestly the safest place for them to sleep. We don't want them in your bed with you, and we also don't want them in your arms all day long and all night long, because that means you're not sleeping, and you guys need to sleep just as much as baby does.
Yes, definitely. So, what advice do you have for parents who are feeling stressed out or overwhelmed when it comes to their babies crying, especially if they have colic? I know it can be very, very overwhelming for parents. What advice do you have?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is to take a minute and step back. So what I want you to do is take a really deep breath, count to 10, and then I want you to lay your baby down in a safe place. So a crib, bassinet, and I want you to walk away for at least 15 minutes, especially if you're feeling really overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it's okay if baby is still crying. Crying is not going to hurt them. It's basically their way of just communicating themselves to you. So they're okay if they're crying. And then for those 15 minutes, I want you to do pretty much anything else. So listen to music for a few minutes, call a friend or a family member, somebody who's a support system for you. You could even do a few simple chores like vacuuming or doing the dishes, anything to kind of get your mind in a different place. And then after about 10 to 15 minutes, if you are calm, go back and check in on baby. If you're not calm, don't pick up baby, just check, make sure they're still safe. And then give it a little more time. Okay. And also remember, call and rely on your support system. So if you need a break, ask someone to help, whether it's your partner or a family member or a friend. Give them a call, see if they can come watch baby for just a little bit while you rest. You need a break, you need to sleep too.
Yeah. You know what they say, it takes a village, right? And
Yes,
there's no shame
yes,
in asking for help, especially with these newborns. So
not
that's
at
great.
all.
So we do have just a couple more questions before we head into the comment section below. So if you have a question you're holding on to, now is the time to comment because we'll get into those. So what should we do, Dr. Orr, if it's the middle of the night and baby won't stop crying? Does Boys Town Pediatrics have like a nursing line that people can call or anything like that?
Yeah. So one of the things I love about Boys Town is we have a 24-hour nurse access line. So you just give our clinic a call, and I know we have lots of different locations. So honestly, if you call any of those locations, nights, weekends, and holidays, sorry, my voice is going, they will transfer you to our nurses line automatically. So there's always someone on call who can answer questions or point you in the right direction. So if you're talking to a nurse and they feel like you need to be seen right then they will point you in the right direction of a pediatrician
That's
or
awesome.
an ER if necessary.
Yeah, how handy. That's great.
Yep.
So, what other resources does Boys Town Pediatrics offer to help parents soothe their crying baby?
Yeah. So again, the 24-hour access nursing line. So if you have questions or you need to see somebody or any more support or anything like that, that's always there, and that's a great resource. We also have appointments in all of our clinics. It's very easy to come in and be seen if you need to. So if you feel like baby's just been crying a lot or something's changed, we're always willing to see them. We also have our same day peds clinics, which are similar to an urgent care, but basically they're an after hours clinic. So they are evenings and weekends and holidays, which
Mhm.
is really nice too, because then you have that access even when your normal clinic is closed. And then we have lots of specialists here as well. So if for some reason your baby was crying because something is wrong, we have allergists and orthopedic doctors. We have pediatric surgeons and pediatric gastroenterologists. Lots of people here to help and support your baby.
Yes, that's awesome. And we have awesome pediatricians like Dr. Orr. So I will leave info in the comment section after this video for you to request a free meet and greet. If you are expecting, we can do a free meet and greet where you can kind of chat with Dr. Orr and learn more about her philosophy of care before you deliver. So that's great. Okay, let's get into some of these comments and go through some of the questions before we do the giveaway. So first of all, thank you all for your kind comments. We're glad that this is helping you. The first one is, why don't newborns have tears?
So they have tear ducts. A lot of the times they get clogged, especially shortly after birth. So a lot of the times they're just kind of working their way clear, and then those tears will develop a little later.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, let me see here. We would love to hear Dr. Orr's thoughts around swaddling, especially swaddling with blankets versus swaddle sacks.
So I'm okay with either of those things. A swaddle blanket is great. Again, it should be large and thin. And then make sure that their feet are swaddled in so that they stay warm, but they're loose. So a lot of people make the mistake of making their feet really tight and they kind of pull them in so their knees are scrunched up. We don't want that. We want them to be able to stretch out. And then swaddle sacks are great too. They tend to stay on a little bit better. I think just because a lot of them have like the Velcro on them, so they can be a little bit tighter. And babies are Houdinis at getting their arms out.
Yeah.
Um, some babies, though, like their arms out. So if your kiddo wants his arms free and seems real upset when you try to constrain him, that's okay. You can swaddle with his arms out, and that's perfectly fine as well.
Perfect. I love those videos where parents like go wake their babies up in the morning and they undo it and their arms like shoot out. It's so cute. Okay, are there different tones we can listen to in order to identify what might be the cause or issue of crying? She lists some, tired, overstimulated, gas pain, etc.
Yeah, so again, a lot of parents do say they start to be able to differentiate between their baby's cries. I think it's very specific tone wise as to the baby. So the more you get to know your baby and the more you hear the types of cries for each thing that they need, you may be able to tell what they're crying for. But as for specific tones, I think that's very specific to your kiddo.
Yeah. Okay, another question on swaddling. Is it true that you shouldn't swaddle a baby at night because you miss hunger cues? Would it make it more likely to keep them asleep past their normal waking hunger point?
No, I would prefer if it helps baby sleep and it'll keep them warm. I would prefer baby to be swaddled at night or some type of swaddle. Again, if your baby likes their arms out, that's perfectly fine. But generally, I think swaddling helps with sleep and things like that. Hunger cues at night. So again, a lot of the times you're going to see, especially in those first few months, a pattern kind of form. And so you may be able to start anticipating when they're going to need to eat versus like hunger cues. So hunger cues might be really big in the day if they're kind of feeding on demand, and overnight it might be more of a schedule kind of thing. But I'm less concerned about you not seeing those hunger cues at night. I'd rather them be swaddled. And then what was the second part of that
It
question?
was, would it make it more likely to keep them asleep past their normal waking hunger point?
Oh, it shouldn't. No. They'll still feel hungry even if they're swaddled. Some babies will try to, so newborn babies, we recommend they eat about every 2 to 3 hours and don't generally go past that 3 hour mark. Every once in a while, you get a kid who is a great sleeper. I know that's what every parent wants. And I know we've always been told not to wake a sleeping baby, but in the middle of the night, if you do have a really good sleeper and they're a pretty new baby, do recommend waking them up at that 3 hour mark. But that may just be that they're not learning all of their own cues yet either. So they may just be sleeping, but I'm not concerned about swaddling causing them to sleep through their own hunger needs. If
Okay.
that makes sense.
Yes, perfect. When should you promote self-soothing?
Yeah. So you can kind of promote it right from the very beginning, like I talked about with the calm baby method, and slowly increasing your interaction with baby and seeing how they help with that. We expect babies to wake up and eat in the middle of the night through about 4 months, 4 to 6 months, and then around that 6 month mark, I start encouraging families to kind of remove those nighttime feeds. Sometimes babies will do this sooner on their own, but if the baby hasn't, then by 6 months I start recommending it. And that's when I start recommending more of the like crying it out, learning more self-soothing techniques. But in those first 1 to 2 months, it's more of how they soothe. So again, doing the calm baby method. So you're still interacting with baby. You're just slowly increasing that interaction so that they can see where they'll soothe on their own, kind of thing.
Mhm. Perfect. The next one is I've heard that it is imperative to pick up a newborn within 30 seconds of crying to promote co regulation as they are unable to independently emotionally regulate. What are your thoughts on this?
So, lots of people have lots of different thoughts about whether when a baby cries, you should immediately pick them up or if you should try to slowly self soothe. I'm more of the mindset that you should slowly self-soothe. So again, I'm not talking about having a 1 to 2 month old cry it out, but slowly increasing your interaction to see if they'll soothe without as much intervention from you. But you're still interacting with the baby.
Mm-hmm.
However, I honestly believe that it's up to you and your baby. And what kind of bond you are making with them, and what you're comfortable with, and what your baby's comfortable with. I The only hesitation I have for you needing to pick your baby up immediately upon crying is I also want you to have a fulfillful life.
Yeah.
So I need you to sleep, and I know that you'll be cooking or cleaning, and sometimes it's not as or dealing with another child, and it's not as easy as immediately picking your baby up.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to finish what you're doing to go get them, and I don't want anyone to feel like if they can't immediately pick their baby up, that they're doing harm to their baby or their bond with their baby. Um, but at the end of the day, whatever you want to do in that manner, I don't think one way or the other you're going to hurt them. I don't think you can hug a baby too much, but I also don't think learning to slowly self-soothe is a bad thing either.
Perfect. Thank you. You give
Mhm.
such thorough explanations. We really appreciate it. We did have a question on taking baby's temperature and thermometers. Just know we are covering baby's first cold with Dr. Alexis Sawyer here on Thursday. So we'll go ahead and talk about the thermometers, temperature, and all that then. Someone asked, is it true that my baby may not cry as often if I'm taking antidepressants? Do you know that? It might vary, I'm sure, but
So I think where that piece of information may have come from is that some antidepressants are expressed through breast milk. So if you are breastfeeding, baby might get some amount of that medication. And a lot of medications that are expressed through breast milk tend to be um, kind of like a sedative. So they make baby more tired. And if baby is more tired, they're not going to cry as much. I think is where maybe that information came from. Definitely, if you are taking any medication, you should talk to your pediatrician and your OBGYN, and to figure out if it's safe to breastfeed baby while you're on that particular medication.
perfect. We had a question on pacifiers for breastfeeding. We're talking about feeding tomorrow with Dr. Kelly, so we'll answer that then. Crying through the night, as long as everything is okay with baby, should you be picking up right away? We just talked about that. Just want to make sure I don't miss any. Someone says, what is normal to expect for my baby's crying amounts and intensity?
Yep. So about 3 hours is probably about what a baby will cry a day for at least the first couple of months, and then it decreases to about 1 to 2 hours, I believe, around like 3 to 4 months. Um, about that time range. So as they get older, the amount of time that they spend crying will be smaller. Again, colic is 3 or more hours a day. So about 3 hours or less is what I expect babies to cry a day. Usually the worst time frames is between like 6 p.m. And a little after. So that
Okay,
evening part tends to be the worst.
good to know. Are there any certain sounds or kinds of white noise you would recommend more than others to use for newborns?
Yep. So every newborn is going to be a little bit different. So what works for one baby may not work for another baby. I personally like that shh sounds, so kind of like the ocean, just because that's very similar to the sounds they were hearing in your belly because all of the blood flow and everything, they're hearing your heartbeat, and that's what their heartbeat sounds like to them when they're in your stomach. So that's the one I always go to. But again, every baby is different. So if your baby likes one noise, your other kiddo might like another.
Hmm. And with the white noise, someone is asking if there's a recommended sound level for that. Would you do all the way up? Would you do halfway?
So enough that you can hear it when you're in the room, not that it's overwhelming. So, kind of like when you have the TV kind of low in the background, you're not watching it, but you can kind of hear it about that level.
Perfect. All right, we'll just have a couple more and then we'll do the giveaway. So, someone says, I've had a lot of people recommend the moving bassinets and bouncers, especially with sleeping. Is that consistent movement recommended or just until they are asleep?
So, um, the moving bassinets, I don't think they're unsafe by any means. And I know there's one where you can kind of strap them into, so it's like a bassinet swaddle combo. And babies do tend to sleep pretty well in those bassinets. My only hesitation with them is that constant movement whenever they wake or when they move may make your baby only sleep when there is that movement.
Uh,
And so, if for some reason you have to go on vacation and you take baby with you and they have to sleep in a different environment without that motion, they may struggle to sleep.
yeah.
So, I always recommend bouncing and soothing and things like that. But when you lay baby down, try to have them at least a little bit awake before you lay them down so they know where they're sleeping. And that way that they know, like, when you lay down, there's not movement or anything, and they can lay down in that space still.
Hmm.
But that's my only hesitation with those beds is just we don't want to make them dependent on that kind of movement or specific sound or anything to fall asleep.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for all those answers. And everyone, thank you for all your questions. And if you, like I said, asked about a different topic, check out our live schedule for the rest of the week on our page, and you might get your question answered then. And also, if you are tuning in later after this live session concludes and you still have a question about crying, go ahead and comment below, and we can get back to you with an answer from Dr. Orr. So, okay, let's run this giveaway. So we are giving away a Baby Cuddles gift basket from Carter's, which, could help your soothing baby. So let's go ahead and run this little wheel. We got everyone's name who commented. Spinning, spinning. I get excited. I'm not even winning anything. Okay, here we go. So, Kimberly R., you are our winner today. So, Kimberly, we will go ahead and send you an email to claim your prize. And thank you. So, Dr. Orr, it has been a pleasure. As always, it's so great to speak with you on such an important topic relating to caring for your newborn. So, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone watching. We'll see you tonight at 6 o'clock for Dr. Orr's video on how to get through the first few sleepless months with a newborn, as well as tomorrow at 3 o'clock for feeding with Dr. Monica Kelly, where we'll cover breastfeeding and bottle feeding. So, all right, until then, we will see you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.